An F-22 Raptor sat lifeless in the desert heat. Engineers baffled the military desperate. Just days before a critical national defense test, hope was gone until one name surfaced. A man long forgotten, a single dad. A veteran with nothing to prove and everything to protect. What he did next didn't just fix a machine. It shook the courtroom, humbled a U.S. senator, and reminded the world that some heroes don't wear uniforms anymore, but they never stop serving. If this kind of story moves you, stories of quiet courage, second chances, and the kind of strength that never asks for applause, we invite you to subscribe to our channel. Every week, we bring you true-to-life, heart-stirring tales that celebrate the human spirit, especially the ones we too often overlook. Now, let's begin. Red Rock Air Force Base, Nevada. The sun hung low over the Mojave horizon, casting long shadows across the shimmering concrete of Red Rock Air Force Base. Heat waves danced above the runway like ghosts of forgotten missions. And at the far end of Hangar 3, beneath a tarp of classified silence, sat an F-22 Raptor, silent still and stubborn. It wasn't just any Raptor. This one, designated Echo 9, was the lead aircraft in a $640 million performance evaluation tied directly to Senate defense renewals. And now it was dead, completely non-responsive. No diagnostic failures, no flagged sensors, no launch, no explanation. Commander Tessa Brooks stood near the nose cone, arms crossed over her chest, jaw clenched tighter than her military bun. She had spent the last 48 hours watching senior engineers throw theories at the aircraft like darts at a bored power grid, recalibrations, heat shielding, data porting, but nothing worked. She took a slow breath. In the distance, the base's radar tower blinked methodically, unaware that everything it protected could unravel in less than 72 hours. Ma'am, a young lieutenant approached cautiously, clipboard, trembling just enough to betray his nerves. The Pentagon's calling again. They want an update before Cobb. And Senator Briggs's office. Well, they've left 3 messages. Tessa didn't respond immediately. Her eyes lingered on the jet's matte surface, sleek, flawless, lethal. It wasn't supposed to fail. "Tell DC the report is underway," she said evenly, though her throat was tight. "And tell the senator's office I'll call them back when this plane breathes again." The lieutenant hesitated, then nodded and walked off. Tessa turned toward the small crowd of engineers, each buried in tablets, surrounded by data charts and holograms, none of which told her what she needed. "Has anyone found anything that's not already in the manual?" she asked flatly. Silence. A few shook their heads. A few didn't bother to look up. Finally, the youngest one, a civilian contractor barely old enough to shave, cleared his throat. "Commander, respectfully, there's someone who might know what this is. He worked on early-gen systems, back before digitals, back when they still listened to the aircraft." Tessa narrowed her gaze. "Name Benjamin Turner. He was a test pilot. I know who he is." She cut in sharply, then looked away just as fast. The hangar fell into silence again, the kind that vibrates with the echo of unsaid things. Later that night, Tessa stood alone on the balcony of her quarters, overlooking the airstrip, coffee untouched in her hand. The desert wind curled gently against her cheek, but her thoughts were elsewhere, years behind and miles away. Ben Turner. The name carried weight. He wasn't just a former test pilot. He was the man who'd once flown into a war zone in a patchwork Falcon to pull her out of a burning Chinook when every other bird had refused to fly. She never forgot the look in his eyes as he pulled her through the smoke, calm, unwavering, like he was fixing a broken part instead of saving a life. That was 12 years ago, Afghanistan. And since then, he disappeared. Not from the world, but from the system, retired, widow, single father. Rumor had it he turned down every contract offer, every consultant badge. Some said he lived in a small house outside Carson City, raising his daughter and restoring vintage airplane engines by feel and memory alone. Tessa looked down at the folder she had kept locked in her bottom drawer. Inside, worn and creased, was a photo Ben in a flight suit, standing beside a younger version of herself, both covered in dust and blood, both smiling like the war hadn't touched them yet. She tapped her comms. "Lieutenant Jacobs," she said. "Yes, Commander." "Put in a request. We're bringing in Ben Turner." By sunrise, a long shadow fell across the tarmac. A beat-up green pickup rolled through the checkpoint, flanked by 2 armed escorts. It didn't look like the kind of vehicle that belonged inside a billion-dollar military facility, but then again, neither did the man who stepped out. Ben Turner. Worn boots, military fatigue jacket patched at the shoulder, tool bag slung casually over one shoulder, hair longer than regulation, eyes sharp as ever. He paused near the aircraft and looked up. Tessa stood waiting. They didn't shake hands. They didn't smile. For a long second, they just stood silent, acknowledging the 1,000 words unsaid between them. "You look," she began, but stopped. Older Ben offered a dry smile, flickering at the edge of his lips. She allowed herself the smallest smirk. I was going to say the same. They turned together toward Echo 9. "She's completely unresponsive," Tessa said, slipping back into commander mode. "No faults on the diagnostics, no flags, just dead." Ben set his bag down and walked around the aircraft slowly, fingers trailing along the riveted fuselage, not inspecting, not scanning, listening. "Your people try cycling the magneto interface 3 times, throttle actuation twice." He crouched low and tapped the lower intake valve, listened, then stood again. "The thing about Raptors," he murmured, "is they don't always break the way you think they will." He placed a hand gently on the engine panel, then said something no one expected. "It's not broken. It's scared." Every tech in earshot looked up. A few chuckled under their breath. But Tessa didn't, because she remembered those words from years ago in a war zone, when he had pulled her from wreckage and said, "This bird isn't down. She's just scared. Let me talk to her." It was nonsense. But back then it worked. "Now I need full access," Ben said quietly. "No sensors, no monitors, no interference. Just me and the aircraft." "That's highly unorthodox," Tessa replied, already hearing the protests in her head from Pentagon compliance and internal security. Ben turned to face her, expression unreadable. "You asked me here not because of what I know, but because of what no one else can hear." And Tessa Commander Brooks, the most precise decorated by the book officer Red Rock had seen in years, nodded and gave him the access. Red Rock Air Force Base. Hangar 3. The massive hangar had fallen into an uneasy stillness. Under the floodlights, the F-22 Raptor loomed like a sleeping predator, lethal but dormant. Around it stood a half-circle of engineers and officers, arms crossed, tablets dimmed, waiting not so patiently, as a man with no rank insignia and no visible clearance laid out a battered canvas tool roll beside one of the most sophisticated aircraft on Earth. Benjamin Turner didn't ask for permission. He didn't need to. He unbuttoned his sleeves and rolled them up slowly, like a man about to perform a delicate surgery. Grease-stained hands revealed old scars, fine lines from years of engine compartments and hydraulic couplings. They weren't ugly. They were earned. A nearby junior tech leaned over and whispered just loud enough to be heard. "You'd think he was fixing a '72 Chevy." Another chuckled. Ben heard it. Of course he did. But he didn't respond. He knelt beside the Raptor's forward intake and pressed his palm to the surface, closed his eyes. The jet's skin still radiated the residual heat of failed ignition attempts, but that wasn't what he felt. He listened not to the plane, but through it. "Torque separation's off," he murmured. "By just a hair. The harmonic sync isn't hitting full compression." Tessa stepped forward, arms behind her back, tone careful. "That's impossible. We ran a full harmonic diagnostic, nothing flagged." Ben didn't move. "I know. Because the sensors are reading ambient vibrations, not live feedback. The plane's not talking to the system, but it's talking to me." More laughter rippled behind him this time with a touch of arrogance. Ben opened one eye, turned toward the youngest tech, barely mid-20s, holding a digital calibrator, like it was gospel. "You ever tune a carburetor by ear?" he asked casually. The kid blinked. "Sir, carburetors haven't been used since." "That's what I thought." He stood, wiped his hand on a rag, and turned to Tessa. "I'm going to need a pressure stethoscope." And a little silence. Half an hour later, the hangar was empty, except for 2 people. Ben lay on his back beneath the jet head, propped on an old canvas pack, tubing from the stethoscope. Trailing along his shoulder, one end pressed against the auxiliary power unit. His fingers tapped along the underbelly with a rhythm that seemed instinctive. Tessa watched from a short distance, leaning against a crate of sealed diagnostics modules. She had cleared the space per his request, even though it raised eyebrows and rattled protocol. But she hadn't forgotten what kind of man Ben Turner was. She studied him carefully. Now, older. Yes, but not diminished. His presence hadn't faded with time. It had simply grown quieter, like a mountain that no longer needed to rise to prove its height. "You still listen more than you speak," she said softly. Ben didn't open his eyes. "And you still speak more than you trust." That made her pause. The words weren't accusatory, just accurate. He sat up slowly and looked at her, his voice low. "You called me here because something told you this wasn't a technical problem. You felt it." Tessa said nothing at first. Then almost reluctantly, "I didn't know who else would understand." Ben nodded. "You always had good instincts. Back in Afghanistan, I saw that." The word hit the air like a drop of ink in water. Afghanistan. The memory returned like smoke. Black skies, rotors screaming, her body half dragged through fire, while he clutched her arm with one hand and clamped a makeshift patch on a ruptured fuel line with the other. The sounds, the heat, the certainty they were both going to die. And then, lift, flight, escape. Ben had collapsed the moment they landed. 2 broken ribs, shrapnel in his shoulder, partial hearing loss. He never complained, never took credit. Just disappeared. "I filed a report after that mission," she said quietly. "Tried to recommend you for a Bronze Star." Ben gave a dry chuckle. Paper medals don't fix broken bones. She stepped closer now. "Why'd you leave the program?" He shrugged. "My wife passed. Sophie was 6. She needed someone who wasn't a ghost in a jumpsuit." Tessa's expression softened. "I'm sorry. I didn't know." Ben nodded again, but this time the silence between them held more weight. Not pain. Understanding. Then his face changed, brows pulling together. He turned back to the engine and pulled a flathead from the kit. "There's a compression tremor," he said. "It only happens when the plane warms past 50% core. That's why no one's caught it." He flicked a small valve cover open with surgical precision. A faint hiss escaped, barely audible. "There it is," he whispered. "She's holding pressure she's not supposed to." Ben reached in and twisted the line until it clicked. Tessa blinked. What was that bleed-off duct misrouted? When you throttle up, it creates a micro-vacuum loop, sucks air away from the combustion chamber instead of feeding it. She frowned. But that shouldn't be possible. That ducting was verified by the contractor. Ben looked up at her. Exactly. Outside the hangar, night had fallen. A wind kicked up over the base, rustling flags and sweeping sand across the runway. Inside, Ben and Tessa stood shoulder to shoulder in front of Echo 9, now humming in low idle. The aircraft once dead was alive again. "She's not combat ready," Ben said, "but she's breathing." Tessa exhaled the relief passing through her slowly like warm water over frost. Then her comms buzzed. She answered. "Commander Brooks." A pause. Her face darkened slightly. "Yes, I understand. I'll report to the courtroom on time." She clicked off. Ben gave her a look. She didn't respond right away. "Then the Senate Oversight Committee is opening a formal inquiry. They've subpoenaed the base. And me." Ben's jaw clenched. "Because you let me near the aircraft, no. Because someone leaked flight records showing a discrepancy in the maintenance reports. Senator Briggs wants a scapegoat." Ben looked back at Echo 9. "I thought fixing the jet would solve the problem," she said, voice low. "It did," Ben replied. "But now we're flying straight into another one. Some memories never die. They wait for the sound that wakes them." The sound came quietly at first. The low thrum of the hangar doors opening wind, cutting through the Nevada dawn, the hum of the desert beyond. But for Benjamin Turner, that sound carried something else. A pulse, a rhythm that lived deep in his bones. It reminded him of rotor blades of smoke, of the kind of silence that only comes after an explosion. He froze. Across the hangar, Commander Tessa Brooks noticed. Ben's hand lingered on the aircraft's wing, but his eyes were far away, seeing a different sky entirely. "Ben," she called softly. He didn't answer, because the smell of burnt oil and dust had already pulled him 12 years back to Afghanistan. The desert there was a different color, not gold like Nevada's, but red-brown soaked with the memory of too many wars. He'd been part of a classified testing detachment flying and repairing experimental airframes in live conditions, something most people thought insane. Ben had always said machines speak loudest when they're scared. No one understood what he meant. Until that night. They were 6 miles out from Forward Base Atlas when the distress call came through. A medevac helicopter call sign Angel 12 had taken heavy fire and was going down near the Valley Ridge. Ben was supposed to stay behind. He was the test pilot, not rescue. But the radio feed was chaos, and then he heard the voice of female flight commander calling coordinates through static and smoke. Tessa Brooks. "Copy. We've lost both rotors, losing altitude." He didn't wait for permission. Within minutes, he'd hotwired an older Falcon support chopper, patched its broken hydraulics with a wrench and duct tape, and pushed it into the sky against every order, against every ounce of logic. It wasn't bravery. It was instinct. When he reached the crash site, the world was fire. The Chinook lay on its side, one rotor blade embedded in the sand, like a tombstone. Ammunition cooked off in the wreckage, lighting the sky in bursts. Through the flames, he saw her Tessa dragging an injured crewman through smoke, uniform half burned, refusing to leave anyone behind. "Get down," he shouted, his voice raw against the roar. She turned, eyes wide, disbelief cutting through terror. "You shouldn't be here. Neither should you." He reached the side hatch, ripped it open, and dropped into the cockpit. One pilot was dead, another unconscious. The engine was bleeding hydraulic fluid from a ruptured feed line. He'd seen this before, the kind of wound that made aircraft scream. Tessa climbed in beside him. "She's gone. The line's burned." "No." Ben muttered, hands already moving, eyes scanning every inch of the panel. "Not gone. Just scared." "Scared," she repeated, half coughing, half laughing through the smoke. Ben tore open the emergency toolkit, found a length of flexible tubing, and jammed it into the ruptured valve. His hands shook from the heat, but his focus never broke. "Get your people strapped in," he ordered. "When this starts, it won't be pretty." Tessa hesitated only a second before nodding. "Copy that." He turned the starter crank manually once, twice, nothing. Then a faint cough, another turn, and the engine sputtered, coughed again, then roared to life like a heartbeat returning from the dead. Tessa grabbed the comms. Angel 12, this is Brooks. We're airborne. Repeat. Airborne. Ben's left arm bled freely from shrapnel, but his right hand stayed steady on the controls. He guided the bird through the crosswinds, the desert wind screaming around them, every vibration telling him what needed to be done. He wasn't flying it. He was feeling it. The Chinook limped back toward the base, leaking fuel but alive. When they landed, medics rushed in. Tessa was the last one off. She turned back toward him, his body slumped, blood soaking through his flight suit. Ben, he managed a weak smile. Told you she was scared. Then the world went dark. The echo faded as the morning sunlight cut across the hangar floor. Ben blinked, returning to now. He inhaled sharply. For a moment, he'd forgotten he was standing in Nevada, not Kandahar. Tessa was watching him from a few feet away. Her eyes softened concern, threading through command. You went somewhere, she said, quietly. He exhaled. Just remembering the last time I tried to fix something that didn't want to be fixed. She didn't press. Instead, she walked closer and set a coffee cup beside his tools. You saved a lot of lives that night. Ben gave a faint smile. Only fixed one helicopter. And one commander, she replied. He looked at her, really looked at her for the first time since returning to base. Time had etched faint lines near her eyes, but her presence still carried that same unshakable strength he'd seen in the desert. Yet there was something new too. Weight, loneliness, responsibility. Tessa, he began. Tone steady. You said the Senate is opening an inquiry. What exactly are they after? She hesitated. They want accountability. Senator Briggs pushed for an audit. He's been after me since last year's defense budget hearing. Ben frowned. Because you challenged his funding proposals, she nodded. I said we needed independent oversight for private contractors, especially the ones producing critical flight components. Ben's gaze darkened. And I assume one of those contractors is backing his campaign. Brightstar Aerospace, she said. They supply 40% of our engine parts, including the pressure ducts. Ben turned slowly toward the Raptor, the same ducts I found reversed. She met his eyes. Exactly. The hangar went silent again, but this time it wasn't mechanical silence. It was political, dangerous. The kind that could destroy careers. Ben crossed his arms, thinking, if they find out I touched that plane, they'll come after you. I already authorized it, she said. It's on record. He shook his head. You shouldn't have done that. I don't regret it, she said simply. You're the only one who could have found the fault. For a long moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the wind pushing against the hangar walls, echoing faintly like the past. Then Ben said quietly, You realize what comes next, right? I'll be called to testify, she said. They'll make me defend decisions I haven't even made yet. Ben nodded. And they'll need a villain. Or a witness, she added. He looked back at the aircraft, a machine built for war, now the centerpiece of a battle fought with words and politics instead of bullets and smoke. He reached out, touched the metal, and whispered, Then we better make sure she's ready to speak. That night, long after the others left, Ben lingered alone in the hangar. The Raptor glistened under the cold, fluorescent lights. He placed a hand over the engine housing and listened again, not for noise, but for rhythm. The hum was steady now, strong, confident. For a moment he thought he heard something else. Faint, distant rotor blades cutting through dust, a voice calling his name, the echo of war. He closed his eyes. Then from the doorway, a soft voice broke through the silence. Dad. He turned. Sophie stood there, her backpack slung over one shoulder, hair tied messily, eyes bright even in the dim light. Tessa had arranged for her to visit the base for the weekend, but Ben hadn't expected her this late. "What are you doing up, kiddo?" She smiled shyly. "Couldn't sleep. I wanted to see what you were fixing." Ben chuckled softly. "Just an old bird with trust issues." Sophie walked up beside him, resting a small hand on the cold metal. "Mom used to say you could make anything work again." His breath caught for a second. Then he smiled. She exaggerated. "No," Sophie said quietly. "She believed in you." Tessa watched them from the doorway unseen, as father and daughter stood side by side before the jet that refused to die, the same way Ben once refused to give up on life, on hope, or on the people who needed him. For the first time in years, the hangar didn't feel like a place of war. It felt like a place of healing. And outside, under the Nevada sky, the night wind carried a faint, familiar sound, like an old engine beginning to turn again. Red Rock Air Force Base. 48 hours later. Commander Tessa Brooks sat alone in the mission planning room, the digital screen before her, casting a cold blue light across her uniform. The image of the F-22 Raptor Echo 9 rotated slowly in 3 dimensions, flawless in design, deadly in function. And now, dangerously political. Behind her, the door hissed open. Lieutenant Jacobs stepped in hesitantly. "Ma'am, message from Washington. Senate Oversight Committee has officially filed charges of protocol breach." Tessa didn't flinch. She'd expected it. What level, she asked. Jacobs cleared his throat. Level 3 violation. Unauthorized systems access granted to an uncredentialed civilian. They want a written statement before end of day. Tessa let the silence settle. Her fingers interlocked tightly in her lap knuckles, white with tension. "Thank you, Lieutenant. That'll be all." He nodded and stepped out, door sliding closed behind him with a quiet finality. She leaned forward, elbows on the table, and exhaled through her nose. They were coming for her. Not because she'd failed, but because she'd acted. Because she'd trusted someone outside their sanctioned ecosystem. Because the man she trusted had exposed a flaw no one else could see, one that traced directly to the contractors backed by Senator Samuel Briggs. And if the truth came out, it would shake the very foundations of Red Rock's multi-billion-dollar defense program. Ben Turner stood atop a maintenance scaffold, half buried in the rear fuselage of Echo 9. A flashlight was clenched between his teeth, his hands working carefully inside a narrow access hatch. Next to him, 2 skeptical Air Force engineers watched with folded arms. "You know this isn't in the manual, right?" one of them said. Ben mumbled around the flashlight. "Good thing I didn't read it." He twisted a wrench gently until a metallic click echoed inside the panel. The aircraft responded with a low hum, soft but stable. He pulled back and wiped his forehead with his sleeve. "Flight sync is back online," he said, climbing down. "Throttle input will now scale without artificial resistance. That's your real-time correction." The younger of the 2 engineers frowned, checking his tablet. But there was no fault registered on Ben, cut him off calmly. "Your diagnostics were talking to a ghost. The sensor mesh hadn't been grounded properly since your last firmware update. Half your data's fabricated." The man blinked, stunned. Ben didn't gloat. He just packed his tools and walked out into the sunlight. He wasn't here to win arguments. He was here to listen to the plane. As he crossed the tarmac, he saw Tessa approaching from the other side, her gait sharp like her boots were slicing the concrete. But her eyes told another story, weariness tucked behind command. "You heard she asked." Ben nodded. "Jacobs told me. They want to question you too. You touched classified systems." "I didn't access anything encrypted," he replied calmly. "Just the metal. Doesn't matter. Briggs will make it matter." She exhaled, pacing. "They've suspended me from active command pending tribunal review. Echo 9 is now under lockdown. No further access unless granted by judicial override." Ben squinted. They locked the plane. She nodded, jaw tightening. Briggs wants to bury it. If no one can prove what caused the malfunction, he walks away clean. The contractors walk away clean. And I take the fall. Ben was quiet for a long moment. Then give me 1 hour inside her, alone. Tessa looked at him, eyebrows raised. You can't. They'll prosecute you. I already took the blame once, he said, with a shrug. And I'm not part of the system anymore. Let them come. Tessa studied him. You're not doing this for me. No, Ben said softly. I'm doing this for her. He meant the aircraft, but he also meant Sophie, and every young pilot who'd one day step into a machine built with buried defects and silenced warnings. The hangar was empty, security feeds disabled temporarily under inspection due to an unrelated sensor calibration issue, courtesy of Lieutenant Jacobs' quiet loyalty. Ben moved like a man on borrowed time. He ran a fine-tuned, handheld diagnostic cross-referencing airflow variances with structural integrity points. The readings told a story most computers ignored: a subtle pattern of thermal expansion in the auxiliary bleed lines. It wasn't design failure. It was intentional oversight, a manufacturing shortcut, a material deviation logged as within spec that only revealed its fault under sustained heat and vibration, the kind of condition only real-world flight could replicate. He copied the data to an encrypted drive. Then he pulled the housing off the microvalve assembly, exposing the Bright Star Aerospace logo etched beneath a layer of heat shielding. Proof. Ben stared at it, jaw set. Then the door behind him slid open loud. He turned fast. Tessa stood there wide-eyed. Ben, we've got a problem. What kind? Briggs just filed for an emergency injunction. They're requesting full transfer of Echo 9 to a federal facility today. Ben's face hardened. They want it out of our hands before we can go to court. She nodded. If they get it to Quantico, it'll disappear. The part you just found will never see sunlight. Ben handed her the drive. Not if you take this to someone who can't be bought. Tessa glanced at the drive, then at him. Judge Teresa Cole? Ben raised an eyebrow. The one who ruled against defense contractors in the Armitage case. The same. She's on the federal circuit now. No nonsense. No bias. You trust her. I trust her more than I trust the system. Ben gave a wry grin. Funny. That's what I used to say about you. Tessa's eyes locked with his. There was nothing flirty in the silence. Just two veterans who had walked through fire together, now standing on the edge of a different kind of battlefield. The courtroom was stone quiet. Judge Teresa Cole, silver-haired and steel-spined, sat behind the elevated bench eyes, scanning the early affidavits submitted in support of the injunction challenge. In the back of the gallery sat Ben, dressed in a civilian suit that didn't quite hide the calluses on his hands or the soldier in his spine. Tessa stood near the plaintiff's table, arms steady expression, neutral. Across from her sat the lawyer for Bright Star Aerospace, and Senator Briggs himself, legs crossed, arrogantly leaning back as if the outcome was already bought and delivered. Judge Cole lifted her gaze. I see we've entered the realm of technical suppression, she said coolly. Commander Brooks, you submitted a direct affidavit asserting the presence of structural tampering. Do you have supporting evidence? Tessa nodded, producing the drive. Yes, Your Honor. Recovered by former test pilot and military engineer Benjamin Turner. The data contains material inconsistencies, cross-referenced with Air Force specs. Cole turned toward Ben. Mr. Turner, are you prepared to testify under oath? Ben rose slowly. I am. Briggs shifted in his chair, and for the first time that day, he looked nervous. U.S. District Court, Federal Circuit, Las Vegas Division. The courtroom doors opened with the soft groan of old hinges, just enough to hush the murmuring crowd. Inside the gallery was unusually full for a procedural injunction hearing. But this case wasn't procedural anymore. It was political, personal, historic. At the defense table sat Commander Tessa Brooks, still in uniform despite her active suspension. Her posture was military precise, but the slight tension in her fingers betrayed what was at stake. Next to her, Benjamin Turner sat, calm, composed, dressed in a dark blue suit that didn't quite hide the calloused hands of a man more familiar with tools than courtrooms. Across the aisle sat Senator Samuel Briggs, flanked by his legal counsel and the representative from Bright Star Aerospace, a tall, polished man with silver cufflinks and a practiced smile. They looked relaxed, confident. They didn't realize the silence was about to crack. Judge Teresa Cole, robed in her standard black, peered over her reading glasses as she reviewed the written affidavit in front of her. "Mr. Turner," she said, her voice firm but even. "You are neither military active nor credentialed by the Department of Defense. Yet you claim to have identified a flaw in a federally contracted aircraft that eluded every diagnostic system in place." "Yes, Your Honor," Ben said, rising slowly to stand. "Because I wasn't listening to the data. I was listening to the machine." The courtroom shifted at that confusion curiosity, even a few suppressed chuckles. Briggs's lawyer smirked. Judge Cole, however, didn't blink. "Explain that, Mr. Turner." Ben nodded and took a breath. "I flew and repaired early Raptor prototypes. Back then, sensors weren't as advanced. We had to feel for structural irregularities, hear the way pressure changed, smell the way metal reacted under heat. You don't forget those things." He paused. 3 days ago, Echo 9 failed ignition, despite flawless diagnostics. I asked for manual access, no sensors, no digital interface. Within 2 hours, I located a vibration anomaly in the pressure bleed system caused by a misrouted duct component manufactured by Bright Star Aerospace. He opened a small folder on the desk and lifted a single photo into view. "This is the part I removed. You'll see a serial number, faint, but verifiable. That number doesn't match the materials listed in Red Rock's procurement records. The deviation is enough to create a micro-vacuum loop once the engine reaches 50% thrust." Judge Cole nodded. "And what does that mean in layman's terms?" Ben looked directly at her. "It means if a pilot takes that aircraft above half power, the engine could stall mid-flight, possibly during combat." A ripple moved through the gallery. Tessa sat very still. Judge Cole narrowed her gaze. "And why wasn't this detected earlier?" Ben's voice dropped to something almost tender. "Because the fault doesn't show up in diagnostics. The software's feedback loop is tied to test simulations, not real-world thermal data. The flaw is mechanical, invisible to code." Briggs's lawyer rose instantly. "Your Honor, with all due respect, this is speculative. The witness is an uncredentialed civilian offering opinions outside any recognized engineering protocol." "Objection overruled," Judge Cole said coldly. "Continue, Mr. Turner." Ben lifted a second document. "This is a correspondence log between Bright Star's engineers and their procurement officer, dated 4 months ago. It mentions the use of a cost-optimized substitute in secondary parts to meet delivery quotas. That substitute is the part I removed." Briggs paled just slightly. Tessa leaned forward, whispering to her attorney, who quickly handed Judge Cole a printed technical breakdown of Ben's findings. "This is a federal whistleblower case in the making," Senator Judge Cole said slowly. "And if Mr. Turner's findings prove accurate, this court will be forced to reevaluate all defense contracts related to Bright Star Aerospace." Briggs cleared his throat. "Your Honor, this is a manipulation. Commander Brooks knowingly authorized an unvetted civilian to access a top-tier military aircraft. That's a breach of national protocol. And that breach," Judge Cole interrupted sharply, "may have prevented catastrophic failure and saved American lives. I'll remind you, Senator, that your role in this court is as an oversight petitioner, not an executioner." The room shifted again. This time, the silence wasn't suspicious. It was reverent. Ben slowly sat down. He felt Tessa's eyes on him, but he didn't look over. He didn't need to. She was breathing again. The sun dipped lower behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the runway. For the first time in a week, the gates to Hangar 3 were open again. And parked inside, blinking lights, and all was Echo 9, now reclassified under legal preservation order. Tessa stood at the hangar threshold, arms crossed her uniform slightly dusted from the dry wind. She didn't say anything when Ben approached. She just handed him a water bottle. "You did more than fix a plane," she said. Ben gave her a quiet nod. "Didn't do it for the court." "I know," she said. "You did it because the plane was trying to tell us something." He gave a small laugh. "You think I sound crazy?" "No," she said. "I think you sound like someone I should have never let walk away." Ben looked at her long and hard, but before he could speak, a junior officer jogged toward them. "Commander Brooks, sir." "You're not going to believe this." They both turned. The young man held out a printed memo, the part Turner identified. "It's part of a shipment distributed to over 17 aircraft across 4 bases, all from the same lot." Ben took the page and scanned it quickly. His stomach sank. Tessa's eyes narrowed. If one part failed, silently, 17 more could be in the air right now waiting to crack. Ben's voice was flat. "That's not a technical issue anymore. That's criminal negligence." Tessa exhaled slowly. "Then we've only just begun." Sophie sat on the floor, cross-legged, building a model jet engine with her travel kit. She looked up as her father walked in his shoulders, tired, but his face calm. "Did you win?" she asked. Ben knelt down next to her and picked up a tiny turbine blade. "I don't think it's about winning," he said. "But we told the truth. That counts for something." She nodded like she understood. Maybe she did. As he helped her fit the turbine blade into place, her voice came soft. "Mom would have been proud." Ben looked at her eyes moistening before he blinked it away. "I hope so," he whispered. He didn't say it aloud, but somewhere deep inside he knew it was true. And outside on the distant runway, Echo 9 stood ready, not just as a machine, but as a symbol of what could happen when someone finally listened to the silence. United States District Court, Las Vegas Federal Building. The courtroom was cooler than usual, both in temperature and atmosphere, as if the marble walls knew secrets were about to be revealed, and they wanted to listen in. Commander Tessa Brooks sat stiff-backed at the defendant's table, not in uniform this time, but in civilian attire, dark blazer, clean blouse, no rank, no bars. Stripped of command, but not of dignity. Her name was now the subject of legal proceedings, not military commendations, not battlefield reports. Charges: unauthorized access authorization, breach of federal aircraft security protocols, dereliction of duty. And behind it all, seated just a few rows back in the gallery, arms folded, chin lifted, was Senator Samuel Briggs. His presence was deliberate, a warning, a performance. Across the aisle, Benjamin Turner entered quietly and took a seat. Not beside Tessa, not behind her, but between her and Briggs. It was a subtle move, but it made a statement. "If you want her, you go through me." Judge Teresa Cole entered and took her seat without fanfare. She adjusted her glasses, flipped a page of her docket, and glanced toward the prosecution. "Mr. Reynolds, you may begin." The assistant U.S. attorney, slick in manner and tailored in suit, stood confidently. "Your Honor, the government contends that Commander Brooks knowingly and willfully authorized access to a classified military aircraft by an unvetted civilian technician, violating not only Air Force security protocols, but federal law under Title 18, Section 1924. He paused, letting the gravity of those words settle. This breach occurred during a period of technical instability in an F-22 Raptor, an aircraft critical to national security. Judge Cole raised a hand. We are not here today to determine guilt, Mr. Reynolds, only to decide whether sufficient cause exists to escalate to a full tribunal. Stick to the facts. Yes, Your Honor. He turned theatrically toward the gallery. The facts are simple. Commander Brooks bypassed her own engineering staff and allowed Mr. Benjamin Turner, an unaffiliated civilian and former test pilot, to physically access a locked aircraft bay. He turned toward her now. Commander Brooks, did you do this? Tessa didn't blink. Yes, I did. Gasps stirred in the back of the courtroom. Reynolds leaned in. So you admit to violating military access protocols? Tessa kept her voice steady. I admit to authorizing access to save lives, Judge Cole interjected. Elaborate. Tessa drew a breath. The aircraft was grounded. All diagnostics read clean, but it refused to start. My engineers couldn't locate the issue. I made the decision to call Mr. Turner because he'd flown and repaired early-generation Raptors. He found a physical flaw undetectable by software, a flaw now linked to 17 other aircraft. If that plane had taken flight during a combat simulation, you are not an engineer, Reynolds cut in. No, Tessa replied, but I am a commander, and when the lives of my pilots are at stake, I act. Judge Cole let the silence stretch. Then, Mr. Turner, please approach. Ben rose. His steps were deliberate, unhurried. When he reached the witness stand, he gave a respectful nod to the judge and sat. You've submitted your testimony regarding the part defect, she said. Do you understand the implications of your presence on that aircraft? Yes, Your Honor. And do you accept that your actions may have violated military protocol? Ben's eyes met hers squarely. I do. Tessa turned sharply. Ben, he held up a hand gently, not silencing her, just protecting her. I accept full responsibility, Ben continued. Commander Brooks acted under my urging. If she violated rules, it was only to allow me to act. She never touched the engine. I did. If someone is to be charged, it should be me. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Even Briggs shifted uncomfortably. Reynolds scoffed. And why, Mr. Turner, would you insert yourself into a federal aircraft with no authorization, no contract, and no legal protection? Ben's voice didn't waver. Because I saw a jet that couldn't speak for itself, and a woman who'd been abandoned by the very system she served. He turned slowly to Judge Cole. I'm not just a mechanic, I'm a father. And when I look at a machine carrying lives into the sky, I think about who's waiting for those pilots to come home. I think about little girls waiting for dads who promise to be back for dinner. A hush fell over the courtroom. Briggs sat motionless, jaw tight. Judge Cole folded her hands. Mr. Turner, I will remind you, this is a legal proceeding, not a TED Talk. Ben gave a tight nod. Yes, Your Honor. But sometimes truth doesn't come in bullet points. After a pause, the judge turned to Tessa. Commander Brooks, have you ever been reprimanded before? No, Your Honor. Have you ever falsified records? Never. Is there any record of personal misconduct during your 18 years of service? No, ma'am. Judge Cole leaned back, then addressed both parties. This court acknowledges the procedural violation, but it also acknowledges the extraordinary circumstances, including the imminent risk to life and the emergence of credible evidence suggesting systemic procurement failures. She looked directly at Senator Briggs. Therefore, I am issuing an immediate protective order, preserving all data and components associated with the aircraft. Furthermore, I am suspending any disciplinary referral for Commander Brooks pending formal investigation into Brightstar Aerospace's contracts and Senator Briggs's oversight role. Briggs's face turned a shade paler. I will also be referring this case to the Department of Justice under the Whistleblower Protection Enhancement Act. Her gavel struck once. Court is adjourned. The desert heat was rising. Reporters gathered at the fence line camera scanning for someone, anyone who would speak. Ben and Tessa walked side by side in silence, the kind of silence shared only by people who had stood in fire together and come out the other side. "You didn't have to do that," Tessa finally said. "Take the fall for me." "Yes, I did." Why, Ben turned to her. Because no one else would. And because someone once risked everything for me in the middle of a burning helicopter. She stopped walking, looked up at him. Their eyes met, not as soldier and civilian, not as commander and mechanic, but as two people carrying the same scar, cut by different blades. And in that look, something shifted. Not romance, not rescue, but recognition. A silent agreement that this fight wasn't over. Senator Briggs sat across from his Bright Star liaison, face flushed, voice low. "Find out who leaked the part log," he growled, "and clean it up. Now." The liaison hesitated. "Sir." Judge Cole's order freezes all records. Briggs's fingers tapped the table with growing intensity. "Then find another way." The storm was coming. And he knew it. Federal courthouse. Special session. 2 days later. The courtroom lights glared brighter than usual. Not by mistake. Every camera in the back row was powered on. National defense journalists, legal correspondents, and one retired general turned TV pundit sat with phones recording quietly in their laps. Because today Benjamin Turner would take the witness stand again. And this time, it wasn't about defending a choice. It was about exposing a system. Judge Teresa Cole entered with her signature brisk step robes flowing behind her like a black flag of order. The room stood, sat, waited. The court is reconvened for evidentiary testimony in the matter of Turner versus Bright Star Aerospace. Mr. Turner, please take the stand. Ben stood slowly dressed in the same suit, but somehow older. Now, not from time, but from weight. As if telling the truth carried mass. He swore and then looked out toward the courtroom. Tessa in the gallery, arms crossed unreadable. Briggs at the table, jaw locked. And Sophie seated beside a junior court aide too young to understand the law, but old enough to understand courage. The prosecutor, Ms. Hale, approached the stand. "You submitted a file titled Anomaly Timeline and Systemic Deviation Report." "Exhibit 14B, yes, ma'am," Ben replied. "And within it, you describe a series of procurement entries showing modified component sourcing in violation of federal aerospace standards." Ben nodded. Yes, 17 aircraft received the same pressure bleed assembly. The supplier logs were scrubbed, but system metadata shows manual override signatures consistent with Bright Star employees. You're saying the records were falsified? I'm saying the records were altered after QA review likely to conceal substitution. Hale took a step forward. Why would a defense contractor do that? Ben's voice was calm, but his words cracked through the silence like thunder. Because titanium alloys are expensive, and because they assumed the software would never know the difference. Gasps. Ben continued. What they didn't count on was a pilot who listens. Across the aisle, Briggs leaned toward his attorney, whispering furiously. The attorney shook his head. Whatever plan they'd prepared, it was unraveling. Hale handed Ben a printed exhibit, side-by-side photos of the defective valve and its federal specification twin. Can you walk us through the difference? Ben lifted the faulty part carefully. This is the Bright Star version. See the weld edge? It's laser soldered, not pressure bonded. Under heat, it expands at 0.021 millimeters per cycle. That creates micro vibrations, invisible to sensors, but over time it warps airflow. And in a plane like the F-22, that means engine stall at mid-thrust. He held up the regulation part. This one is true spec, triple tempered alloy. If you were in combat, this would keep you flying. The other would send you into a spin. Judge Cole leaned forward. And you believe this substitution was systemic? Ben nodded. Yes, Your Honor. Not a one-time error. A pattern. And I believe it was authorized at the highest levels to meet budget deadlines. She glanced toward Briggs. The senator stared straight ahead. Then a moment no one expected. Ben reached into his folder and pulled out a sealed envelope. Your Honor, may I submit a personal statement for the record? You may. Ben opened the envelope and read, I once believed aircraft were machines, that their strength was in their metal, their speed, their firepower. But I was wrong. What makes a machine fly isn't the engine, it's trust. Trust between builder and pilot, between commander and soldier. When that trust is broken, even titanium becomes hollow. I listened to that plane. She was trying to tell us the truth. I just happened to be the one who heard it. He folded the paper and set it down. Judge Cole nodded, once then turned to the gallery. This court finds reasonable cause to refer this matter to the Department of Justice for criminal investigation under federal contractor fraud statutes and potential violations of the False Claims Act. Senator Briggs finally broke his silence. Your Honor, this is political theater. She held up a hand. Senator, I suggest you retain private counsel. Gasps. Again. No theatrics. Just law. Court was adjourned. Reporters surged forward, microphones like missiles. Ben walked out with Tessa beside him, silent but steady. Behind them, a courthouse marshal helped escort Sophie toward the car, shielding her from the swarm. Mr. Turner, do you have a comment on today's ruling, Commander Brooks? Are you being reinstated? Do you think the Pentagon knew Ben paused at the top step? He turned slowly toward the cameras and said, Sometimes the bravest thing a soldier can do is speak after the war is over. Then he walked on. Tessa stood in front of Echo 9. She had her uniform back, full reinstatement, no restrictions, pending commendation. But none of it mattered compared to what she felt standing next to that aircraft now whole humming clean, not just fixed, trusted again. Ben approached, toolbox in hand. You know they're naming a maintenance protocol after you. Now, she asked. Hope it's the Turner tap and listen method, he joked. She smiled. They're calling it the Turner exception. He nodded, amused. I'll take it. She glanced at him. There's a hearing next month, joint Senate session. They want you to speak. You up for that? Ben looked down at his daughter, who was sitting nearby, drawing a picture of a jet. Then back at Tessa. I think I'll bring her with me. Why? Because some people still need to learn how to listen. Federal Courthouse, Washington, D.C. 1 week later, a tension thicker than protocol hung in the courtroom air. The Department of Justice had opened formal proceedings into Bright Star Aerospace and its alleged conspiracy to defraud the U.S. military. But today's hearing wasn't just about contracts, specs, or politics. It was about legacy. The courtroom's benches were filled with uniformed officers, engineers, journalists, and veterans in dark suits with silver pins on their lapels. They had come not just to witness testimony, but to watch the unspoken battle between two kinds of power: the political weight of a U.S. senator and the moral gravity of a forgotten test pilot who wouldn't stop listening. At the front of the room, Judge Teresa Cole reviewed the witness list. Mr. Benjamin Turner will again provide testimony related to procurement deviation patterns. However, she added, eyes narrowing slightly, the court has received notice of an additional individual requesting to address this chamber. A quiet murmur ran through the audience. Tessa Brooks sat straighter in her seat. She hadn't heard anything about another witness. Judge Cole continued, glancing at the door. The court recognizes a late-filed entry by General Scott L. Peterson, retired former commanding officer of 7th Tactical Fighter Wing, United States Air Force. Silence. Then movement. The doors at the back of the room opened slowly, and a man walked in tall, broad-shouldered, wearing full-dress blues. chest heavy with ribbons, shoulders straight despite age. His silver hair was neatly trimmed, but the eyes beneath carried decades of command and something else, recognition. Ben stood as the general approached. They hadn't seen each other in 14 years. The last time had been in a medical tent near Bagram Air Base, when Ben, hooked to oxygen and painkillers, had looked up at a younger Peterson and whispered, "Check the intake valves. They're misaligned." That warning had saved the general's squadron. Today, Peterson would return the favor. Judge Cole addressed him formally. "General Peterson, your statement will be entered into record as testimonial." "Understood, Your Honor." He approached the front of the room, removed his cap, and placed it carefully on the table. Then he turned, facing the courtroom, not the bench. "I served this country for 36 years, he began. I've flown missions in every hemisphere. I've commanded thousands. But the bravest man I ever met wasn't the one with the most kills. It was the man who taught me to listen to the machine before it screams." He turned toward Ben. "Benjamin Turner saved my life, not with a gun, not with glory, but with a wrench, with silence, with precision." He let that sit before continuing. 4 days ago, I reviewed the engineering logs from Echo 9, and I recognized the same pattern that nearly brought down my own aircraft 14 years ago. It's not an isolated case. It's a blueprint of negligence, and this time, someone traced it back to its source. He looked toward the Bright Star legal team. His voice remained calm. That someone wasn't the Air Force, wasn't the Pentagon, wasn't even an active officer. It was a father, a widower, a man no one invited because they forgot what experience sounds like. Senator Briggs's lawyer shot to his feet. "Objection, this testimony is anecdotal, not technical." Judge Cole cut in voice, low and firm. "Sit down, counselor. We are well past the point of playing by semantics." The general turned back to the judge. "I came here today for one reason. To confirm that Benjamin Turner isn't a whistleblower." Ben looked up, puzzled. "He's a compass," the general said. "And when your compass points north, you follow it, especially when the storm is coming." The courtroom was still. Then Judge Cole leaned forward, her voice carrying the gravity of authority. "This court formally recognizes General Peterson's statement in support of Mr. Turner's evidentiary contributions and grants temporary protective status under military council jurisdiction." She looked directly at Senator Briggs. "And in light of new testimonial from a decorated officer, I am moving to freeze all Bright Star Aerospace Department of Defense contracts until a formal audit can be conducted." Briggs stood furious. "Your Honor, this is overreach." Senator Judge Cole snapped, her tone glacial. "This is justice. Sit down." Tessa stood beside Ben as reporters formed a perimeter just outside the federal gate. Cameras flashed, microphones rose, but they didn't move. They stood in silence, watching the storm roll outward from the courthouse. Then footsteps approached. "General Peterson," he extended a hand to Ben. "I owe you more than one," the general said quietly. Ben shook it firmly. "You just repaid the first." Tessa stepped forward. "General, what you said in there, it shifted everything." Peterson looked at her and nodded. It wasn't a favor. It was the truth. Then he turned to Sophie, who stood behind her father, drawing quietly on her sketch pad. She looked up, holding it up shyly. The drawing showed a jet, an F-22 soaring above a desert skyline. Below it were two small figures, one in uniform, the other in a worn jacket. And beneath them, in child's handwriting, "Some people fix planes. Others fix silence." The general blinked and smiled. "May I keep that?" he asked. Sophie beamed. "Only if you hang it on a wall where people forget to listen." Tessa sat across from Ben, a pot of coffee between them, steam curling gently like quiet thoughts. "They're asking you to speak at the Senate Oversight Review next month," she said. He sighed. "Not really my crowd." "You said that about courtrooms." He looked at her softer now. "I don't speak for glory, Tess. I speak when something's wrong." She met his eyes. "Then speak for the people who can't. The engineers, the pilots, the families." A pause. Then he nodded. "I'll go." Tessa leaned back. "You know, for a man who doesn't say much, you're becoming hard to silence." Ben chuckled. "That's the idea. United States Federal Court. Final session." A rare stillness lingered over the courtroom. Not tension. Not even anticipation. Just silence. The kind that falls before a storm breaks, or before truth lands with the weight of something irreversible. Commander Tessa Brooks sat quietly at the left table, her uniform reinstated, ribbons restored, but her focus locked not on the honor, nor the cameras, but on the man sitting beside her. Benjamin Turner. He wore no uniform, no badge, no title. But the quiet respect in every pair of eyes around him spoke volumes. In the span of weeks, he had gone from a forgotten engineer to the most listened-to voice in the room. Today, Judge Teresa Cole would read the court's findings, and with them, a verdict that would echo across military bases, corporate boardrooms, and Senate hallways. Court came to order. Judge Cole looked out over the packed room. In attendance were not just the press and defense officials, but junior airmen, civilian contractors, even a few family members of those who had flown the affected jets. She cleared her throat and began. "This court has reviewed over 200 pages of testimony, technical analysis, procurement records, and formal statements by military and civilian personnel alike. We have heard from veterans engineers, commanding officers, and even the innocent daughter of one such man, who reminded us that silence is not the absence of noise, but often the presence of truth no one wants to hear." Her eyes lingered for a moment on Sophie, seated behind her father with her sketch pad folded on her lap. In that silence we found deception, negligence, and courage. She turned toward the Bright Star Aerospace legal team. "It is the opinion of this court that Bright Star knowingly falsified supplier records to substitute cheaper, non-spec parts in at least 17 aircraft engines under DoD contract, risking the lives of U.S. service members." Gasps echoed from the rear. Senator Briggs shifted in his seat, adjusting his tie with fingers that suddenly couldn't stay still. Judge Cole didn't flinch. Furthermore, this court finds that Senator Samuel Briggs, while not directly responsible for the alterations, willfully ignored multiple flagged reports and used his position to suppress internal investigations. This constitutes obstruction of oversight. As a result, the following actions are hereby ordered. All Bright Star defense contracts are suspended pending full federal audit. Whistleblower protections are extended to Benjamin Turner under the False Claims Act and Federal Accountability Statute. Commander Tessa Brooks is fully exonerated and restored to command with commendation. All evidence is referred to the Department of Justice and Senate Ethics Committee for further prosecution. She paused, and then, "This hearing is concluded." The silence is broken. The gavel fell. 3 taps. History made. The courtroom erupted not in cheers but in breath, the collective release of something held too long. Tessa turned to Ben, her voice barely above a whisper. "You did it." Ben shook his head gently. "We did." But he wasn't smiling. Not yet. Because across the aisle, Senator Briggs stood slowly gathering his papers. His face didn't break, didn't show fear. Just pride. Wounded, but not gone. A snake wounded doesn't always die. Sometimes it just learns where not to bite next. As Briggs turned toward the exit, his eyes met Ben's one last time. It wasn't hatred, it was acknowledgement. Like a man who had finally heard the thing he'd spent years ignoring. The sun had started to fall behind the Capitol dome, casting long amber light across the steps. Ben stood off to the side away from the reporters, arms folded, gaze distant. Sophie leaned against his leg, holding his hand in silence. Nearby, General Peterson gave a quiet statement to the press, and Tessa finished shaking hands with 2 Pentagon officials. She walked toward Ben with a small envelope in hand. "Orders came through," she said. "Pentagon's funding a new aviation program for veterans, engineering-based." Ben raised a brow. "Wear Red Rock, under your name." He chuckled. "You're kidding." She shook her head. "The Turner Initiative." He let out a long, slow breath. "They must be desperate." "They're inspired," she corrected. "You gave them something rare. What proof that one quiet man can change everything?" He didn't respond, but his eyes softened. Then he turned to Sophie. "You okay, kiddo?" She smiled. I liked the judge. She didn't smile much, but she listened. Ben looked up at Tessa. "That's enough, isn't it?" She nodded. "Sometimes, that's everything." The stars were crisp above the Nevada desert. The air cool, the wind still. Hangar 3 stood dark closed for now, its steel doors reflecting the moonlight like armor. Inside, the F-22 Raptor Echo 9 slept in silence, but not the kind of silence that comes from fear. It was peace. Ben stood just outside the hangar with Tessa. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The kind of connection forged in fire and forged again in truth doesn't require small talk. She finally broke the silence. "What now?" he thought for a long time. Then, "Now we build something better." Tessa looked at him. Together, he turned toward her. "If you're willing." She smiled just a little. "I've been waiting a long time for you to stop walking away from everything." "I didn't walk away," he said quietly. "I was just fixing something first." She tilted her head. "What?" He looked toward Sophie playing nearby in the grass with a toy glider. "My daughter." Suddenly, Sophie ran over holding a drawing in both hands. She held it up between them. It was Echo 9 again. But this time, it was soaring above storm clouds, lightning below, sunlight above. She'd written a sentence in big block letters. "Sometimes it takes a broken engine to lift a broken truth." Ben smiled. Tessa wiped away a tear she didn't expect. And above them, a single aircraft flew high overhead, just a speck of silver in the evening sky. But it left no trail. Only a feeling that something had been made right. Red Rock Air Base, observation deck. Sunset. The desert wind had quieted as if the sky itself had paused to listen. From the rooftop of the observation deck, you could see everything. The vast tarmac, stretching into golden distance, Hangar 3, resting like a steel sentinel, and above it all, a sun that refused to go quietly. Commander Tessa Brooks stood near the edge, arms folded, hair down for the first time in months, catching the breeze. Her uniform jacket hung from a chair behind her. Tonight she wasn't a commander. She was just a woman trying to breathe again. Behind her, the door opened. Footsteps. She didn't turn. She didn't have to. "I figured you'd be up here," Ben said, setting a second cup of coffee beside hers on the railing. "Same view as 13 years ago." "Different war," she replied. Same kind of silence. They stood shoulder to shoulder, not speaking for a long while. The horizon shifted from gold to amber to soft blue. Then she finally asked, without looking at him, "Why did you leave the program back then, after Afghanistan? After you saved me?" Ben didn't answer right away. He took a slow sip from the cup. The wind tugged gently at his sleeves. "I didn't leave the program," he said. "I left the fight." She turned to him, brows drawing in. Why, he met her eyes. And for the first time, the weight he'd carried cracked open just a little. "My wife passed 4 months after I came home. It wasn't the war. It wasn't dramatic, just a blood clot. 1 minute she was laughing at breakfast. The next, I was on the kitchen floor holding her hand, waiting for an ambulance that couldn't change anything. Tessa's breath caught. I didn't know she whispered. No one did, he said. I disappeared, took Sophie, moved out to Carson, started fixing things that couldn't talk back. Lawnmowers, farm engines, old airplanes. I told myself I was giving her a quiet life. And were you? Tessa asked gently. Ben's voice cracked just enough to be human. I don't know. Maybe I was just hiding. She turned fully now facing him. Ben, what you did for that plane, for this country, for me, you didn't have to come back. But you did. He met her gaze this time without looking away. I didn't come back for them, he said quietly. I came back for you. The words weren't rehearsed. They weren't polished. But they were true. Tessa blinked once, as if clearing a window inside herself. I was angry at you for a long time, she admitted. I know, he said. I thought you left because it wasn't enough. Because I wasn't enough. Ben exhaled, voice barely above the wind. You were the only thing that ever felt real in all that noise. Silence. But not the heavy kind. The kind that let something finally settle. Below them, a pair of cadets walked across the tarmac, laughing their boots, scuffing the concrete. Youth. Future. Tessa's voice was steadier now. They want to name a new program after you. The Engineering Initiative. Veteran-led diagnostics. They want your face on posters. He chuckled. That'll scare off recruitment. They're offering a permanent position. Civilian lead. Oversight on special systems. He raised an eyebrow. You offering or asking? She smiled. Maybe both. He looked out at the fading light. I never planned on coming back. But now that I'm here, maybe it's time. For what she asked, he turned back to her. For something more than just fixing what's broken. Maybe it's time to help build what's next. She stepped closer now, not tentatively, but as someone who had earned the right. I never said thank you, she said. You didn't have to. I'm saying it now. He nodded, then reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a small folded piece of paper, worn at the corners. She opened it carefully. It was the mission photo from Afghanistan, the two of them beside the scorched helicopter, bruised, filthy alive. On the back, in faded ink, was one line. If I make it out of this, I owe you dinner. Tessa looked up, stunned. You kept this never found the right night. She laughed softly. Ben Turner, are you asking me out on a date? I'm asking you if you're still hungry. She smiled. Always. The dining room was dim, empty. A single table by the window still had 2 chairs set. No candles, no music. Just 2 old soldiers trying to feel young again. Ben and Tessa sat across from each other, takeout containers, open boots stretched out under the table. You know, she said between bites, the last time we ate together was in a tent during a sandstorm. Yeah, he smirked. You still stole my protein bar. You left it unguarded. Rookie mistake. They laughed. Softly. Freely. Then a silence fell, not because there was nothing to say, but because everything had already been said. Finally, Tessa leaned forward. Where do we go from here? Ben didn't hesitate. We take it one step at a time. You lead your command. I help rebuild this program. We both raise Sophie into a world where silence doesn't have to hide truth. Tessa nodded, then asked with a half smile. And us, Ben, looked at her gently. We listen, he said, to each other. Every day, until we don't need words. Outside the window, the desert wind stirred again, whispering along the hangar walls. And above them, somewhere in the quiet sky, a single jet soared engine, humming steady and true. 6 months later, Red Rock Air Base, South Hangar. The sun rose slowly over the Nevada desert, painting the base in soft hues of gold and promise. But this wasn't just any morning. Today, Red Rock wasn't just a base. It was a launch pad for something new. Inside the newly renovated south hangar, a long banner stretched across the steel rafters. Inauguration ceremony. The Turner Aviation Program for Veterans. Beneath it stood rows of folding chairs, gleaming polished concrete, and a small wooden stage, where a microphone waited quietly like a runway, waiting for takeoff. And sitting near the front in a pressed collared shirt and dark slacks was Benjamin Turner, hands resting calmly on his lap. No ribbons, no rank, just presence. Next to him, Sophie, now 12, wore a light blue dress and clutched a framed drawing in her hands, one the world would soon see. Behind them, the audience grew by the minute. Engineers, flight officers, Pentagon officials, senators, the good kind, and veterans from across the country, some in wheelchairs, some walking tall, all with the look of men and women who'd been given one more reason to believe. Tessa Brooks took the podium as the ceremony began, her voice clear-grounded. There are two kinds of silence, she began, the kind that hides truth and the kind that listens until something better can rise. She paused, glancing at Ben. This program was born not from policy but from pain, from courage, from refusal, the refusal to let broken systems silence the very people who built them. Applause rippled like a quiet wave. This hangar used to house machines. Now it will house minds. Veterans will come here not to be fixed, but to be recognized as engineers, mentors, and builders of the next generation. She looked to the audience. Today I'd like to invite the man who made that possible. A man who listens, who repairs, who restores, and who reminds us that legacy isn't made in battle, it's made in what comes after. She turned toward him. Ben approached the podium slowly, deliberately. He hadn't prepared a speech. He didn't need one. He scanned the crowd. So many faces. So many stories. Then his eyes found Sophie, and that was all he needed. I never thought I'd be standing here, he began. When I left the service, I didn't think I had anything left to give. I had a daughter to raise, a life to rebuild, and a silence that I thought meant peace. But silence isn't always peace. Sometimes it's what happens when truth gets buried under fear. And sometimes it takes a broken engine or a broken system to remind us that listening is how we rebuild trust. This hangar, this program, this moment, they don't belong to me. They belong to the mechanic, too afraid to speak up. To the engineer who spotted something wrong and got shut down. To the pilot who trusted a checklist and didn't come home. And to the little girl who believed her dad could still make something fly. He paused. Emotion caught in his throat, but he didn't let it stop him. So we're building something here. Not just aircraft, not just protocols, but belief. Belief that no one is too small to fix something big. He nodded once. That was all. And it was more than enough. After the applause, Sophie stepped up beside him, holding her frame. "Can I show them now?" she whispered. He smiled. "Go ahead." She turned it around and the audience leaned in. It was a hand-drawn scene. A hangar bathed in sunlight. A young girl standing between two adults, one in uniform, one in worn jeans. Above them soared a jet. And at the bottom, in her handwriting, "Some heroes fix machines, others fix people." A hush fell across the room. And then, slowly, the audience rose to their feet. Not clapping, just standing. In reverence, Ben stood beside Echo 9, the same jet that once refused to fly, now shining like a mirror to everything he'd survived. Tessa approached quietly. "You really hate speeches, don't you?" He smirked. "I prefer socket wrenches." "Well," she said, handing him a small case. Maybe you'll like this better. Inside was a silver nameplate engraved Ben Turner, Chief Technical Mentor, Turner Aviation Initiative. He ran a thumb across the letters, then looked at her. No one ever gave me a title that felt like it fit before. She stepped closer. That's because you finally stopped hiding. He looked at her, really looked, and said without hesitation, "I'm done hiding." She smiled, not wide, not theatrical, just real. As twilight settled over the desert, Ben lifted his gaze skyward. A pair of jets crossed overhead, leaving behind long white trails that glowed pink in the sunset. Sophie ran past them laughing as she held out her toy glider. "Look, Daddy, I'm flying it just like you." He watched her heart full, and for the first time in a long, long while, he didn't feel broken. He felt airborne. Before we go, we'd love to know, where are you watching from? It warms our hearts to see how these stories reach across states, oceans, and time zones to bring people together. So please take a moment and share in the comments. We always read them. And if you found meaning in today's story, if it reminded you of someone or stirred something in you, we invite you to subscribe to our channel. This channel is built for you, for those who believe that kindness still matters, that healing is possible, and that even quiet people can make a powerful difference. Thank you for spending your time with us. It means more than you know. Until next time, stay well, stay kind, and keep listening.